How to get away with a murder is my topic this Saturday. And I hope that nobody over here intends to do something like this, and this is why you came to listen to the sermon. If this is the case, this is a disclaimer. It's not meant to be serious title. It's meant to be the murder of the truth, not of a person. We do not condone any kind of murders in this church. Okay, Apostle John was one of the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life and death and resurrection, most importantly. And when he writes about these events, about Jesus' life, about his suffering, about his resurrection, about post-resurrection events, he writes about these things as real events. He is not writing about them as a philosophical premise or as a scientific theory that needs to be proven. But he is writing about these events as they are real facts. And so he writes this: that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. And he is very clear about what transpired, that which we have touched and seen. And then in verse 3 again he says, we proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, not heard, and heard. So he is really trying to talk to the people in his time when the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life and death still existed, and trying to put this point down as he's writing it. We are not just telling you a story. We are not just telling you a moral parable. We are not just giving you something for you to think about how it might be. We are telling you about something that we couldn't explain, we didn't want to believe, but we had to because it was simply a fact, and it was a simple historical wow moment of our lives. Never before something like this happened. We are not people who are gullible, who want to believe and find some kind of peace amidst all the chaos in some kind of religion. We were very happily Jewish people. But what happened with Jesus Christ of Nazareth, how he lived, how he performed miracles, what he did at the end of his life surprised us the most. We are simply changed people. And so write to you about what we have seen and heard and what our hands have touched. And Peter is joining him in this as well. And he writes this: we did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were what? Eyewitnesses of His majesty. Eyewitnesses of His majesty. And that word majesty here, there is so much packed in. Supernatural birth, supernatural life, horrible death, supernatural resurrection, majesty. And then His ascension to heaven. We have not followed cleverly invented fables because they would not be able to do something like this, knowing who they are, knowing their background, knowing their education. And yes, there are many deniers of Jesus, there are many deniers of Jesus' resurrection and the Bible truthfulness. If you read any kind of modern literature today, media, you will find out a very common opinion, very common thread, that these stories are just stories that developed over the course of the time, that they probably just mistook for a very simple Jewish rabbi and made him into a god because they were grieving so much upon his death. They couldn't handle reality, and they made up all the stories that happened. And you have heard these stories. To go even further, they started discrediting the Bible itself as something being of not of God. And just be careful when this falls down. Don't be too close. It may really hurt somebody. I'm serious about this. So just climb over here and come sit here behind him so you are safe there. And the whole attempt of the modern civilization is to crush down our beliefs. Just like these girls are building here the blocks. We have our beliefs. We take some out and we look at it. Santa Claus. No, this doesn't stand the scrutiny of the time. and we chuck it away. We take the another one. Mom loves us. Yep, that's pretty much true, right, moms? That wasn't really overwhelming, yes. Moms, do you love your kids, or say amen to that? Okay. And so we are pulling out these Jenga blocks of our faith and our beliefs one by one, and we are re-examining them as we grow older, as we mature. And what is really important to happen as us as a church, as us believers, is that we do that process. That we take every piece of our beliefs, re-examining and say, this is fabrication, this is a fact, this is something that makes sense, this is something I was just told. Like one of the laws that Denise and I are often talking about is misuse of that Roman text, all things work good for those who are in Christ Jesus. Believing that whatever you do, whatever happens in your life, it's meant to happen to you for some reason. We took this block out, we looked at it, and we said, that is misinterpretation of God's word. And we chucked it out, and we put the right block in, which means in the end, everything will work out for us as God's people, as individuals. But this doesn't mean that everything is happening for our reason. The cancers, diseases, accidents, wars, genocides, rapes, they don't happen for any reason apart that there is a bad world. So we have to re-examine our beliefs and our values. But sometimes, when we are not careful, we let the world take the blocks out of our faith. And when this happens, when the blocks are out and our whole faith foundation becomes too unstable, what happens then? Our whole world crashes. And we are probably living more on hear, hey, say beliefs, or we are just supported by whatever the majority people believes than our own beliefs. How to get away with a murder? If you were about to murder someone and try to get away with this, how would you do it? There is a series which I borrowed this title from called How to Get Away with a Murder. And they teach about 4 things you have to do to get away with a murder. In our translation, get away with the murder of the truth. These are the 4 points. Number 1 is discredit the witness or discredit the eyewitness. So the lawyer would start with character assassination of a person who's eyewitness, trying to plant an evidence, kind of a doubt in jury's thoughts that whatever this witness is saying is true. So they're saying is, look, this guy has done this and this and that. This guy has, not fed his cat for 3 days. Do you really believe you can trust him with everything else he says here? So character assassination is the first thing that people do. Number 2 is introduce a new suspect. Divert the jury's attention away from a real criminal onto a new suspect. And plant a doubt in their mind that something like this might have happened. That actually not this guy he's just an innocent or a victim, but this guy there, or this guy, or possibly there, or actually who could know? There's so many varieties of them. Perhaps we should just drop the whole case and instead of, going for this guy. Number 3 is bury the evidence, or bury the jury with the evidence, both. Bury the evidence, try to hide the facts or twist them and change them so the jury could not see the whole picture of the evidence. They could just see the part of the evidence that suits your narrative, your story. And even more importantly, throw so much false, misconstructed half-truths, assumptions, and scholarly work at them that the jury feels so overwhelmed with the amount of existing counter-evidence that they start feeling doubtful about the whole outcome. It doesn't matter if all the evidence cannot stand the test. Each individual evidence, perhaps, they can be given answer and reasoning against. But if there is such a big amount of this kind of counter-evidences, as a whole, they look formidable. And people will get discouraged to sift through all this rubbish to find out the truth. Number 4 is offer the other side of the story. This is what I say. You are telling me this. But let me tell you the other side of this story. Every story has two sides, right? Absolutely. We say this so often. We say so often we are convinced that this is the truth. When there is a marriage split, we always say there are two parties in the marriage. There must be guilt in both of them. But really, is this the truth, or is this just an assumption? And so we have translated this half-truth into all facets of our existence, trying to convince ourselves that there must be other side, untold stories, so we should not be that much committed to only one version of the event. So having introduced you to 4 steps as how to get away with a murder, let's see how this works on 2 things in real life. One is a real event which happened, and the second is more closer to us, biblical foundations. Before I go there, I had to again apologize. I often bring example stories from the Nazi Germany. Please, this is not because I have anything against beautiful Germans. I am a quarter of a German. I speak German. My grandfather was German. I love these people. But for a while, my quarter of the people were really deceived by horrible Nazi regime, and this is why I'm talking about this example. So I will be talking to you about how this applies to a Holocaust deniers. Holocaust deniers. Now, this happened only 65 years ago, the Holocaust. I want you to pay attention carefully to see how much we have stopped to believe by now. And it happened just 65 years ago. Before we go there, today's sermon is actually just a little introduction into 4-part series I will be doing on the church side. This is a really lovely happening worshipful event, and we want to bring great information. It's happening all the time, in-depth messages and so on. But on the other side of the church, I have a little bit more time to dwell into details. So we will be doing 4-part series about this, and we'll be talking about really evidences for the Jesus resurrection, the Bible, the contradictions in the Bible, and a few other things, so that if you want to go in depth a little bit, this will be the time to go to hear it, and it starts from August chapter 5. So here is the movie that drew my attention. Who has seen this movie in the cinemas or at home? It's called Denial, acted by Rachel Weisz. I love this actress. She has acted in some of my favorite movies. And it's not just based on a true story, as this says, but it is almost a reenactment of the true story. Or true story about how Deborah Lipstadt, which is this girl here, wrote a book called Denying the Holocaust in 1963. And in this, now this is talking about shaking foundations. At some point, this is going to crash down. Girls, do you think you've done enough? Shall I let him crash it down? Okay. Let me know when it falls down. Do we have a doctor standing? Denton, you're here? Have your bag? Okay. Parents, don't do this at home. Do it at church where it's safe to do it. Thanks, Chris, for being there as well in the case of emergencies. So she wrote a book, Denying the Holocaust. And this is the subtitle, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory. Memory. Truth and memory. And she's talking in this book about how there is more and more of university campuses of the people, private persons, who are engaging into discrediting Holocaust. That there are 2 ways they are saying is. Number 1 is that it didn't happen, and number 2, nowhere near the horror stories that we hear about Holocaust happened. And she is going from the country to country to showing where these Holocaust deniers live and how they approach the whole thing. If you want to read a good book that is kind of frightening, read this book. Unfortunately, Croatian first president, Franjo Tuđman, is mentioned in this book as well. He too wanted to kind of wash the dark part of Croatian history and make it look better than it actually was. And so she is going on, and at one point she calls out David Irving, a British historian who has written a number of different books. He takes offense because she called him that she is unintentionally lying about history and he's twisting the facts. He takes offense and he takes her to court. And this movie is about this court. About she needs to prove that she meant this, that he is lying, and that the evidence he presents that Holocaust is just a fabrication are actually not evidences that he is really twisting them. See the movie. It's a great thing, but it's a great conflict, and you are there for a moment confused with something that David Irving says, with the facts that he points out. If you go to YouTube, you will be able to see some movies, and you will get confused for a while. Do you know until when? Until you go to the real historians and understand. Give them a big clap. Well done. If we don't build our faith on fact-based evidence, our faith-based evidence of our faith-based belief will crumble like this. And this is a serious thing, people. If you go to the real world, to the university, to jobs, you need to base your faith on the facts, not just on the stories from the Bible. Stories from the Bible are great. I love them. I read them. But the facts are something where your faith needs to grow. Otherwise, this will happen. And in this movie, there is this whole debate. Now, here is how they do this. How the Holocaust deniers are denying the Holocaust. I'm not even going to ask who of you believes in Holocaust and who doesn't, because this would be a really stupid question for such a great audience like you are. But here is the problematic how they do this. The Holocaust deniers claim that Nazis had no official policy or intention of exterminating Jews. Nazis did not use gas chambers to mass murder Jews. The figure of 5 to 6 million Jewish deaths is a gross exaggeration, and the actual number is in order of magnitude much, much lower. And some people say possibly around 200,000 people. Still big, but nowhere intentional and as big scales as the main media is portraying it. They also claim these smaller claims, that stories of the Holocaust were a myth initially created by the allies of the World War II to demonize Germans and therefore to engage everybody else to attack them, to have a united front. The real perpetrators of all these stories are, of course, the Jews. They are the guilty ones. They are the bad people. They made all these stories about 6 million Jews dead because they wanted to fund their own Israeli state, which finally happened in 1947. Good people. So this is who did it, really. Jews. It's their fault. They kill themselves, and they have organized all this stuff, lies. Documentary evidence of the Holocaust, from photographs to the diary of Anne Frank, in their opinion, is fabricated. This is what they claim. They also claim that survivors' testimonies are filled with errors and inconsistencies and are thus unreliable. So are there many Holocaust survivors? Absolutely. When you put them together, a room full of Holocaust survivors, are you going to get one single story which will be problem-free? Probably not. They will be telling you different stories about different facts, and you will find out with 50 different stories if you listen to 50 different things. Remember just this fact, and we talk later on about Bible witnesses and 4 different Gospels. Interrogators obtained Nazi prisoners' confession of war crimes through the use of torture, and therefore none of this can be believed because they just said so that they could be let off free. And finally, the Nazi treatment of Jews was not different from what the Allies did to their enemies in the World War II. So yes, Allies came, they bombed the Germans, many Germans died, and of course that's why Allies probably bombed the Jewish concentration camps and they killed them as well. So these are some of the statements. They are made even though in the time when we have lots of eyewitnesses and the sea of evidence for Holocaust really happening. We have written documents, we have eyewitness testimonies, we have photographs, we have the camps that still exist today. Has anyone perhaps here been in a concentration camp somewhere? And then we have inferential evidence or evidence from silence. When you compare, for instance, the number of Jews before the First World War and then how many we have today. I know what some of you will say. What about the Red Cross data? And there is also the very good answer about this. There is a bit of something that is misinterpreted and misused and made up by the Holocaust deniers to Holocaust numbers to look different. So we have lots of evidence, and I'm not here to argue for the Holocaust because I think this is a real fact. In fact, I know it's a real fact. See, I grew up in Krklec, and where I used to snowboard in my snow sleigh, just across the fence there was a cemetery. There was a cemetery, it was Jewish cemetery, it was all Jewish cemetery, and then discovered there was lots of graves. And there also discovered there is a huge Jewish cemetery in my city, Krklec. But I didn't know any Jewish synagogue operating in my city. And I asked about this, and people wouldn't be able to tell me much about this. And of course, it became obvious that there is not a single Jewish person living in Krklec, but they had two pretty large cemeteries. What happened there? You don't have to convince me and my people who grew up with the stories of people what happened in concentration camps in Croatia during the World War II and hearing the stories there. But people who don't live in this environment, who don't have this first knowledge, talking to the eye-to-eye to eyewitnesses, they are making a real stories about all the stuff. So here is how this usually happens in this case. Number one is create the witness. Holocaust deniers simply come and say, well, look, let me just read this one for you. Patrick Buchanan, a right-wing conservative columnist in USA, referred to this so-called Holocaust survivor syndrome. Holocaust survivor syndrome. According to him, this involves group fantasies of martyrdom and heroics. Can you believe this? So what they went through, what the survivors went through the Second World War, this is actually not true. They were just hallucinating about the whole stuff. And there was some kind of mass hallucination. And they believed themselves bigger heroes than they are. They probably lived pretty well somewhere in the city, and after the war, they just made the whole stuff up. Discredit the witness, attack their character, make them feel greedy. When they come to tell the story about Holocaust, tell them, you are making up this story only because you want lots of money from us. You want control over everybody, isn't it? This is why you're making these stories about you being killed and your family disappearing in the concentration camps. Attack the person, attack the eyewitness, discredit the witness. Number two, the way they do this, introduce a new suspect. Again, there is a whole reason why Holocaust happened, people, if you didn't know, is so Jews can get their own country, so they could be funding their own projects, that they would live well. And also, another thing is that how they were killed. Well, they were killed by American and British bombings. That's how they were killed in the same place. Just as German population was killed, so was also killed the Jewish population. Which is absolutely ridiculous stuff when you find that actually there are evidences and pictures of the whole areas of bodies being burned, massacred, people starving to death. There is a photographic evidence. There is a German Nazis were very precise in documenting everything, and they didn't burn all the books. It's very, very clear what was happening. But when you hear how they attack these people, remember this when we talk about Bible in a minute, then bear the evidence. So they have a lot of there as well. The abundance of documents and testimonies that confirm the Holocaust are dismissed by the Holocaust deniers as contrived, coerced, or forgeries and falsehoods. Robert Forreston, a former professor of literature at the University of Lyons, France, interprets the Nazi decree which mandated that Jews wear a yellow stars as a measure to ensure the safety of German soldiers. See, Jewish people engaged in espionage, terrorism, black market operations, and armed trafficking. German soldiers needed a means to protect themselves against this formidable enemy, which were the Jews. Even the small kids, 6-year-old, could attack German soldiers. So introduce a new enemy, shift the focus from the real problem onto somebody else there. And then finally, tell the other side of the story. The interesting story, so seeks a voice disguised as a genuine scholarly debate. There is in Australia an organization called the Journal for Historical Review. It sounds pretty legitimate, doesn't it? But it is full of these attacks on Holocaust survivors plus other so-called freedoms and government watchers. I hate to tell you, they are Christians. It's embarrassing, but they are. They love to be called revisionists, not deniers, because they said, we need to show the world the other side of what happened. So you will have the whole truth, not just one part of the truth. And they believe that discovering the truth, and they are presenting the other side. Now, having said all this, Holocaust happened 65 years ago. How is it possible that disagreement exists about an event that just happened 65 years ago, that was on a worldwide scale, that was witnessed by millions of the people, with so much evidence, with so many eyewitnesses? How is it possible that Holocaust could be attacked and people are trying to twist the facts and forget and change the truth into just an opinion? Does this just blow your brain out? It does mine. So, but when you understand this, that people in today's time and age can twist the truth to become just an opinion, just one version of the truth, to suit their agenda. And do you know what agenda is actually of the Holocaust survivors or Holocaust deniers? It's anti-Semitism. It's always been there in Europe, in America, and it still is. If this stuff is possible, does it surprise you, the moon landing? Some people don't believe in moon landing. I've talked to the person, we start talking about it. He doesn't believe in the Holocaust, he doesn't believe in moon landing. September 11, Americans shot themselves so they can have an excuse to go to Iraq. People, if you really believe in stuff like this, please check your facts. And Adventists are sometimes vulnerable to this because we have in our DNA a little bit of love for conspiracy theories. You know, we do believe in great controversy. I'm a great believer in great controversies. Yes, there are powers to be that want to suppress the truth, and they've been doing it for ages. This is why I love my church. But let's not, just be conspiracy theorists and think this is something intelligent. This is ridiculous. And that person I talked, Earth is flat. Did you know that? Absolutely. The Bible talks about firmament over it. We are like a little snow egg. Okay, let's not talk about it. So if this is possible, that people twist the facts happened just 65 years ago, what do you think is going to happen to Jesus' death and resurrection? It happened 2,000 years ago. And they will apply the same 4 steps to discredit Jesus' life and resurrection and the formation of the first church, just as they try to make a conspiracy theory against the Holocaust. Exactly the same. I wish we had time to do this. Again, invite you to my 4-part series. But there are modern biblical authors like Bart Ehrman and so on, who's pretty big now everywhere in the newspapers and so on, who wrote the book, How Did Jesus Become God? And following the same steps. Jesus used to be a normal guy, and then church elevated him. So church gains the power, so church gains the money, so there is no disappointment about his resurrection. And when you listen to this, at the very instant, it sounds almost logical. And if you want this to be true, you will believe it. But if you do believe it, you don't believe it because this is a fact. You believe it because you want this to be true. And you need to distinguish between what you want and what is just convenience truth for you, so you can go on sinning, so you can go without commitment in your life towards anyone, so you can say, poof, this is just something to control me. And there is a difference between this convenient truth for you and the real truth. And this is that something real happened. And the evidence for Jesus' resurrection and death is very similar vein as the evidence for the Holocaust. Apart from photographs, we don't have photographs. But I will deal with this when we have details. So this is how they are attempting to murder the biblical truth. Number one, discredit the witness. There are too many discrepancies and contradictions in the gospel accounts. Isn't this the same accusation that they made against Holocaust survivors? The people who come down with their number on here, with a story that just, breaks your heart, and they are accused that there are too many discrepancies among their witnesses, and therefore they can't be believed. They claimed the witnesses of resurrected Jesus are biased. And I'm thinking, of course you would be biased if you saw a dead man rise. You wouldn't be thinking, oh, I might believe this or not. Of course I'm going to believe. I see this dead person now alive and majestic and go to heaven. If you can remain biased, you'll be a dead person. You will have no heart. The test of the Bible has not survived well, they claim. There are more different readings of the New Testament text than there are words in the New Testament. So we will look at the critical apparatus and how we compare. But here's an interesting thing. Contrary to any other ancient literature, biblical literature, New Testament, has 5,000 different manuscripts, scrolls and parchments that we compare, and biblical scholars, not of whom all are believers in God, compare, and they are saying, no, we know exactly what the original Bible says. But when you present somebody only with this thing, there are so many discrepancies in the Bible, so many different readings, it may sound correct. And again, we'll come to this bearing with the evidence. The first Christians must have either hallucinated or exaggerated Jesus' life into a legend unrecognizable to the origins, to the original person. Of course, you have to say that if you really don't want Jesus to be a powerful person who you have to give account to. You have to discredit him, you have to put him down, you have to bury him because it doesn't suit your agenda. But he did something absolutely wonderful, and we'll talk about is how he changed the world and witnesses and his disciples. Introduce a new suspect. Who did it? Well, swoon theory. Jesus just swooned on the cross. He revived himself in the grave. He picked and went on later on, and he was actually never dead. Really? When you compare to how much blood he lost, how his body actually, when he was pierced with a spear through the heart and the lungs, was actually producing very evidence of the death. When you see how much he was suffering there, and when he was on the cross, a position that he was in without breathing for some time, if this person can then get up and walk on the feet which were pierced, with this open wound on of his back which is weeping, with his spear wound, if this guy can then appear to the people to Emmaus and walk all distance from Jerusalem to Emmaus and seem all right, he is doing something miraculous there. Of course, swoon theory is just a ridiculous conspiracy theory that we will talk in details later on. Hallucination theory. Disciples hallucinated. The same was said for witnesses of the Holocaust. There is no such thing in the science, in the medical journals, as a complete group hallucination. The same thing, the same events, the same order of events. Disciples stole the body of Jesus. The bunch of guys who were frightened, who didn't believe that Jesus will resurrect, who were numerically small, I don't think so. And the Bible, high criticism. Of course, Bible is just written. This is the problem with inspiration. Bury the evidence, there is a lot of the stuff you can throw against the Bible, little details, little questions, little doubts. Do you know why? Because the Bible is based in the real history, in the real geography. And when you combine everything, humanness of biblical writers, the small biblical contradictions, the misunderstanding of the Bible inspiration, the archaeology, which is huge. Some stuff is missing, some stuff is broken, some stuff you'll never find. You can throw a lot at the Christian faith because it's based on in the real world. And finally, the other side of the story. There is a theistic view, and humanistic view. One is saying, nah, just made up stories. The second one is saying, just made up stories, but it would be nice if it was true. And the third one is, there were nice moral writings. Let's see what is nice in there. But there are different alternative stories to everything, so it's with Jesus' life and resurrection. I've given you just a very, very brief overview where I want to head with this thing, but I want to beg you, get your facts straight. Your faith will not survive if it remains a childlike faith. Can we have the band up here? I would like to read this text with you once more before we finish with the beautiful praise of our band. That I do not write to you, John says, because you do not know the truth, but because you do know it, and because no lie comes from the truth. And they are claiming over and over. It's testified with the character of Jesus and his disciples and the principles of Christianity, which completely transformed the culture and the art and the music and everything we know about today in the Western society. He says, who is the liar? It is the man who denies that Jesus is the Christ. And I am today appealing to you that you would commit to growing in your faith, to looking at the evidence, to looking at the facts, and that you would in your heart call Jesus your Lord and your God. Because the person who does deny the Father and Son, he is called the Antichrist. He is against Christ. He is the one who is bringing chaos. Today, the Bible says, if you would hear his voice, listen to him. Thank you for praising us.